that the only foundation upon which peace and stability can rest is the two-state solution. Two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for his statement. Distinguished delegates, the committee has concluded its consideration of Agenda 50, but there is a right of reply requested. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation is compelled to take the floor to exercise its right of reply in response to the provocative statement by the representative of Israel. We categorically reject the allegations made by the representative of Israel. It is a grave political provocation to demonize and tarnish the international image of the DPRK, a dignified UN member state. At the same time, it is a sinister disinformation campaign and propaganda campaign to distract the attention of the international community from its most heinous war crimes and crimes against humanity. In defiance of the strong protest and condemnation of the international community, Israel continues to perpetrate most barbaric atrocities against the innocent Palestinian civilians, even at this moment. As a result, the Gaza Strip is increasingly becoming a living hell, and the Middle East situation is spiraling out of control. The international community should take urgent measures to hold Israel accountable for its war crimes and the crimes against humanity. If Israel continues to perpetrate barbaric atrocities against the innocent Palestinian people and other Arab peoples, it is most likely be subjected to stronger condemnation. On this occasion, my delegation reiterates its steadfast support and solidarity with the Palestinian people in their just struggle to restore all inalienable rights, including the establishment of an independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and we have now concluded consideration of Agenda Item 50. Distinguished delegates, the committee will now consider Agenda Item 120, entitled Revitalization of the Work of the General Assembly. Under this item, the committee has before it one draft decision submitted by the Bureau and contained in Document A/C4/78/L16, entitled Proposed Program of Work and Timetable of the Special Political and Decolonization Committee, Fourth Committee, for the 79th session of the General Assembly. The preparation of this proposed program of work took into account the experience of the current and previous session of the committee regarding, in particular, the number of meetings required to conduct and conclude the work of the committee in an efficient and timely manner. With the approval of members of the committee, the draft decision regarding this proposed program of work for the next session will be annexed to the report on this item to the General Assembly plenary for consideration. I would, of course, note that it will be up to the Bureau of the 79th session of the committee to review the proposed program of work and make adjustments as they deem necessary. Regarding the committee's working methods, which is also relevant under Agenda Item 120, delegations will recall that I touched upon this during our organizational meeting on the 28th of September. On that occasion, I announced that the committee shall continue with its working methods of holding interactive dialogues under the items on which it has traditionally held these dialogues, namely the items on the questions related to information, outer space, peacekeeping, special political missions, effects of atomic radiation, as well as UNRWA and Israeli practices and settlement activities. Another aspect of the committee's working methods addressed at the organizational meeting on 28 September related to the adoption of time limits for various categories of statements. I want to believe that this has served us well throughout this session. And as no delegation had requested the floor on working methods during the organizational meeting, it is my intention to convene during the intersessional period an informal meeting of the fourth committee devoted to working methods to enable us to explore lessons learned and best practices going forward. In the meantime, are there any comments on the draft decision submitted by the Bureau and contained in document A/C4/78L16 relating to the proposed program of work of the committee for the 79th session, which the committee now has before it? I see no request. May I take it that the committee agrees to adopt the draft decision contained in document A/C4/78/L16? I hear no objection. It is so decided. The committee has now thus concluded its consideration of agenda item 120. Item 135, program planning. Regarding agenda item 135 entitled Program Planning, I wish to draw attention to the Bureau's message to delegations circulated on 23 October via e-delegate, in which the Bureau informed members that it had carefully reviewed the report of the Committee on Program and Coordination at its 63rd session, 2023, contained in document A/78/16. Based on the contents of that report, the Bureau confirmed that CPC considered 3 programs relevant to the work of the fourth committee, namely Program 4, Peacekeeping Operations, Program 5, Peaceful Use of Outer Space, and Program 22, Palestine Refugees, and adopted conclusions and recommendations on all of them. Against that background, the Bureau determined that there's no basis for the fourth committee to consider any program plan that may be outstanding, in particular, the program plan for Program 2, Political Affairs, within the terms of paragraph 84 of the CPC report and of General Assembly Resolution 77/254. Accordingly, the need does not arise for the fourth committee to take up the item on program planning during this main part of this session of the General Assembly. Distinguished delegates, this brings us to the conclusion of our consideration of the agenda items which the General Assembly allocated to the Special Political and Decolonization Committee for the main part of the 78th session. The committee will meet in 2024 to take up the report of the Special Committee on Peacekeeping Operations under Agenda Item 51, and to also elect its Bureau for the 79th session of the General Assembly. During this part of the 78th session of the Assembly, taking into account the action taken here this morning, the committee has adopted a total of 33 draft resolutions and 3 draft decisions. as a result of the cancellation of one meeting, owing to the unforeseen exhaustion of the list of speakers for item 50 earlier than anticipated, we held a total of 26 formal meetings. In the course of those meetings, we successfully completed our consideration of the wide variety of agenda items allocated to the committee. The work of the fourth committee continued this session to make an important contribution to the debate of the General Assembly on decolonization, international peace, security, and development, and on a wide range of matters relating to global communications, outer space, and the effects of atomic radiation. The agenda items allocated to the committee provided unique opportunities for delegations to consider these issues in an in-depth manner, and the format of interactive dialogues and questions and answer periods continued to be useful and informative. We welcomed the presence this year of a number of senior officials, including the President of the General Assembly and Undersecretaries General from a number of UN departments. Numerous member states were represented by officials from capitals and permanent representatives, and all delegations demonstrated a keen interest in ensuring that the international community remains seized of the important political colonization matters before this committee. Under the decolonization cluster of items covered by agenda items 54 to 58, we had 82 statements during the general debate on the various non-self-governing territories. The committee also had statements by the Premier of the British Virgin Islands, the President of French Polynesia, the Deputy Chief Minister of Gibraltar, and the representatives of the Governor of Guam and of the Government of New Caledonia. In addition, a total of 158 individuals and organizations spoke as petitioners on the questions of French Polynesia, New Caledonia, and Western Sahara. In considering the political, economic, and social conditions in the non-self-governing territory,
law, it also means unfettered, safe, and sustained access to bring in and distribute supplies at much greater scale, volume, and frequency, and that includes fuel. It also means investing in the $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal that the UN has just launched to help the civilians in Gaza. Martin Griffiths, for his part, the emergency relief coordinator, was physically in Paris, as well as the UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini. They both attended the conference in person. Their remarks reiterated the Secretary General's calls. Mr. Lazzarini also reminded participants that 700,000 people are now living in 150 UNRWA schools and buildings across the Gaza Strip. He said that UNRWA shelters are overcrowded with little food, water, or privacy, adding that the appalling sanitary conditions represent a looming public health hazard. He thanked the countries that announced the new contributions for the past weeks, but added that UNRWA's core budget remains underfunded, and the biggest UN agency in Gaza might not have the funds for staff salaries until the end of the year, he added. For his part, Martin Griffiths said civilians must be protected and their essential needs met wherever they are in Gaza. The UN, he added, cannot be part of a unilateral proposal to push hundreds of thousands of desperate civilians into so-called safe zones. He said the UN has not been involved in preparing for the arrival of displaced people in any prospective safe zone in Gaza. On behalf of the humanitarian community, he expressed his concerns first about the safety of civilians in so-called safe zones if there's no agreement between all of the parties to their establishment, and also said he's concerned that satisfactory conditions do not exist anywhere in Gaza to ensure adequate shelter, food, water, sanitation, and health. The remarks of these three people were shared with you earlier. And just a bit of a update about what is going on the ground with further details. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that amid the tense hostilities, people in north of Gaza continue to flee the south, mostly on foot, facing thirst and exhaustion along the way. Yesterday, about 50,000 people evacuated the north of Gaza. Clashes and shelling on and around the road reportedly continued, endangering evacuees as they move south, with the report of corpses being seen on the road. Hundreds of thousands of people who still remain in the north of Gaza are facing a dire humanitarian situation, struggling to secure the minimum amounts of water and food to survive. Our humanitarian colleagues are telling us that as of yesterday, a total of 106 trucks, primarily carrying food, medicine, health supplies, bottled water, and hygiene products, crossed from Egypt into Gaza through the Rafah crossing. The total number since the 21st of October, according to our math, is 756. This, of course, represents only a fraction of what is needed and still no fuel going in. Also, to speak about the lack of fuel and its consequences, Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza City had to shut down key services yesterday. Al-Auda Hospital, the only provider of maternity services in North Gaza, warned about its imminent closure. And as we mentioned yesterday, the World Health Organization and UNRWA on Tuesday managed to deliver much-needed medical supplies and medicine to Al-Shifa, a hospital in Gaza City. That was only the second delivery of life-saving supplies to this hospital since the beginning of the conflict. The first delivery was on the 24th of October. Our WHO colleagues said that while this is welcome, the quantities delivered are far from sufficient to meet with the immediate needs. And just to let you know that on Monday, November 13th, the UN flag will be lowered at half-mast to pay tribute to our UNRWA colleagues who have lost their lives in Gaza. We're also asking UN officers around the world to do so on the same day and observe a minute of silence on Monday. For those of you who are interested, we're making provisions for visual coverage. The flag will be lowered at 7:30 on Monday morning. Please be in touch with our Malu colleagues if you want to send a camera person or a photographer or just want to watch. Turning to Ukraine, in a statement issued by our humanitarian coordinator, Denise Brown, she said, issued today, she said that she is outraged to learn of an attack yesterday on a civilian vessel that was entering the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Pivdeny, killing a port worker and injuring crew members of the vessel. She shared her condolences with the family of the killed port pilot and hoped for the recovery of the injured. Ms. Brown noted that this happens just a few days after a series of attacks that killed and injured civilians, destroyed grain supplies, and damaged a 124-year-old fine arts museum in Odessa. She pointed out that yesterday's attack is one of the 30 attacks on Ukrainian port facilities since the termination of the Black Sea Initiative in July. The tragic incident marks the first time civilians are killed or injured on a civilian vessel. And she stressed that international humanitarian law strictly prohibits attacks on civilian infrastructure. Turning to South Sudan, our humanitarian colleagues say they are sounding the alarm over the surge of returnees and refugees fleeing the conflict to the north in Sudan. The number of people arriving in South Sudan increased in October by at least 50% compared to September. As of yesterday, that would be November 8th, more than 366,000 men, women, and children had been recorded crossing the border from Sudan since the conflict began. As the conflict edges further south, it could trigger more displacement, putting additional pressure on an already overstretched response. The humanitarian community continues to provide life-saving assistance where resources allow. However, some partners are expecting to run out of funds before the end of the year. The emergency response plan for returnees and refugees in South Sudan reported it's just 14% funded. It is critical that donors step up their support so that we and our partners can provide food and nutrition assistance, adequate sanitation and hygiene facilities, as well as onward transportation services. And in Somalia, we have released $25 million to cope with the impacts of a once-in-a-century flooding. The Office for the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and its partners estimate that 1.6 million people could be impacted by floods during the current rainy season, made even more intense by the concurrence of El Nino conditions and a positive Indian Ocean dipole phenomena. Several areas in the middle Juba region have received more rain in just the past week than in the entire seasonal average. The newly released funds include $10 million from the Central Emergency Response Fund and $15 million from the Somalia Humanitarian Fund. They will support work to save lives, stem disease outbreak, and deal with food insecurity. And speaking of El Nino, today the Food and Agriculture Organization released an updated anticipatory action and response plan to support 4.8 million people in countries that are expected to feel the impact of El Nino. The $160 million plan will help people in countries across the Eastern and Southern Africa, Asia, and the Pacific and Latin America and the Caribbean through March of next year. The world enters this El Nino cycle with a record 258 million people experiencing acute hunger in 2022, and only 20% of the total funds required to cope with high levels of acute food insecurity. Many countries facing humanitarian crises also risk being affected by El Nino impacts in the coming weeks and months. More details on the interweb. Today is the International Week of Science and Peace. Who knew? The week encourages greater academic exchanges on a subject of universal importance, while also generating greater awareness of the relationship of science and peace among the general public. That includes you. Tomorrow we will have guests from Sudan and Nigeria. We'll have Clementine Nkweta Salami, the resident humanitarian coordinator for Sudan. And we will have Matthias Schmale, the resident humanitarian coordinator ad interim for Nigeria. They will both brief you on the humanitarian situation in their respective countries so that we don't lose sight of other crises around the world. Edith, then Amélie, then Deji.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General have any comment on the White House announcement that Israel has agreed to 4-hour daily pauses to allow humanitarian goods to get in and perhaps spur the release of the hostages?
Well, we've just seen the press reports not long ago. I mean, how any such halt in the fighting and how it would work for humanitarian purposes would need to be coordinated with the United Nations, especially on the issue of timings and location. And obviously, in order for this to be done safely for humanitarian purposes, it would have to be agreed with all parties to the conflict to be truly effective.
A question on a completely different subject. There's been some rather intense fighting in Shan State in Myanmar, and this made me wonder, is the Secretary General going to appoint a new special envoy for Myanmar?
Yes.
When?
As soon as we have an announcement. That process, I don't mean to make light of it, that process is ongoing.
Because it has been quite a long time.
Indeed it has. Okay, Amélie, then Deji.
A follow-up on that. if I understand correctly, what the White House said is that the main purpose of the pause would be for the civilian to flee. Do you think? I mean, how far can you said that most of them are fleeing by foot? So how far can they go in 4 hours? And I mean, how do you think it could help in any way the civilian to flee the north?
Again, I mean, we saw this like you did, right, on press reports, where I'm just talking to you about kind of the principles on our end, right? How if these things are to be effective for humanitarian purposes, they need to be coordinated with us as we are the deliverers of humanitarian assistance, especially on timing and location. And it's of course critical that all the parties to this conflict also agree with them. But we're obviously trying to seek out more information. Deji.
A follow-up on that, but in the view of the United Nations, you don't think this is a humanitarian pause?
I mean,
or not?
I'm not.
Or we have to.
You have to ask those who made the announcement how they labeled it. I gave you my. I mean, I gave you our initial reaction to what was announced. If we get more information, we'll have most likely further reaction. But it was announced in a certain way. Certain, terminology was used. Being very careful in the words that they use. I mean, that is our response.
Do you think, humanitarianly speaking, is that?
Well, I mean, I think the SG has addressed this has addressed this publicly. I think, obviously there would have to be some sort of a transitory period. I mean, what he said, the best case scenario, as far as the Secretary General is concerned, is that after the end of military operations, a reinvigorated and strengthened Palestinian Authority would assume political control in Gaza. We could play a role as well in supporting other countries. Other entities would obviously have a role to play. The U.S. would have a role to play. But all of that would need to be discussed with the Israelis and the Palestinians.
But then would the UN support the security force of Israel being there for a period of time?
I mean, as I said, there would obviously have to be transition period. I think the Secretary General laid out what his long-term vision would be.
And one last question. How's the $1.2 billion appeal going?
I'm sure it was just launched. We'll try to get some updates from OCHA. But just as a reminder, all of our humanitarian appeals are posted on the OCHA website, and you can look minute by minute, and you can see how quickly your own donation will be registered, Deji. Anade.
I have a question on Haiti. Earlier today, the Kenyan Interior Minister said that the mission to Haiti, the international force, is not a Kenyan mission, it's a United Nations mission that Kenya was asked to coordinate. He then went on to say that the mission will not be deployed before all the resources are mobilized and available. And as you may know, estimates say that the force needs about 255 million euros for deployment. And so my question is, given the sense of urgency described by both the UN and the Secretary General when it comes to the situation in Haiti, what is your reaction to today's developments?
Well, it is what the Security Council approved, which is the UN Security Council approved the dispatch of a multinational force or mission. So, in a sense, it is under the umbrella of a UN resolution, but it is not a UN peacekeeping or UN police force with blue helmets. So we are not in the business of putting that force together. It is important that the international community, those countries that have the capacity and the will to do it, support the Kenyan efforts, because they are, and it is not I'm not here to support or contradict what the foreign minister is, but he's correct in that sense. It is also vital that those countries that have the financial capacity support those countries that are going to put physical boots on the ground. And the situation is not getting better, right? And everyone has a, every member state has a role to play in supporting the efforts of those who are willing to send men and women to help the people of Haiti.
Follow-up. What can the UN do to speed up the collection of these resources such that the force can be deployed as soon as possible?
We are continuing our advocacy. We in terms of the Secretary General, the Secretary don't have. It's not as if we have money to put into those efforts. We are obviously always there to help as a resource for or guidance for those countries who will be putting boots on the ground. Tony, and then yep.
Thank you, Steph. Earlier today, Mr. Griffith in Paris mentioned that the UN has not been involved in preparing for the arrival of displaced people in any prospective safe zone in Gaza. So, but you do have staff in in the south, south of Gaza. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, what's their role right now? How are they coping with the displacement of this huge number of people?
They are doing whatever they can with the little resources that we have in order to ensure that people are staying alive. I mean, we're running out of, there's not enough food, there's not enough water, not to mention the fuel. I think what Mr. Griffiths was referring to, and I think it's worth reading exactly what he said very carefully, is this whole discussion about setting up quote unquote safe zones, and our concerns about what that means, right? And what needs to be done in order for any safe zone to be truly safe. And I think he laid it out with great clarity.
Follow-up has not been involved, which means, is the UN still part of this discussion today?
Well, we are still very much part of the discussions on the humanitarian situation. What Mr. Griffiths is saying is that we're not advocating for these safe zones as they're being laid out. Yes, please.
Thank you, Stefan. I just wanted to get a clarification. You mentioned earlier that there's currently one hospital in Gaza that provides maternal services, correct?
If I said it, I hope it's true. And let me check what exactly. As I said, yes, in northern Gaza. I said, thank you for somebody for paying attention. Al-Auda Hospital is the only provider of maternity services in northern Gaza.
Northern Gaza.
Yeah.
Did you mention the name? So I believe you mentioned the
Al-Auda
name.
Hospital.
Sorry?
Al-Auda Hospital.
Al-Auda. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Dennis and Dawn, and then.
Tomorrow there's going to be a Paris Peace Forum. Will Secretary General or UN on the whole participate in this event?
The Secretary General will not be at the Paris Peace Forum. I have to check what our participation is. I know we will have people there. I need to double check for you. Okay. Dawn.
Steph, I have a follow-up and then a question. Just so I'm clear, nobody really knows what these safe zones are? It just sounds
Is that
like
a question or a statement?
It's a question. Nobody really knows what these safe zones are. I think it was Antony Blinken that first mentioned this a couple of weeks ago or a week ago about creating safe zones. So
Right.
Are you saying that the UN doesn't know what these safe zones
Well,
are?
I think there's a lot of discussion going on about safe zones. What we're saying, for a zone to be safe for us, it cannot be a unilateral decision by one party to a conflict for it to be a safe zone. I mean, I'm talking here, obviously, what's going on in Gaza, but in general principles. If a safe zone in a conflict is going to be established, it is clear that all of the parties who are involved in the fighting have to agree that the zone is safe, because otherwise you're putting not only the civilians at risk, but you're also putting the humanitarians at risk.
I wanted to ask you a question. The other day at the White House, John Kirby was asked about the Secretary General's comment referring to Gaza as a graveyard for children. And And in his response, I'm just a little confused, and I'm trying to understand whether or not the Secretary General sees it this way. He seemed to pivot towards Hamas and saying that the reason that there's so many deaths, I mean, not directly, but Hamas is making it worse because they're putting those children and their families in greater danger, and I'm quoting him here, by not letting them go, by encouraging them to stay. And I'm wondering if is that how the Secretary General understands this, that it's Hamas that's preventing people from, children from leaving?
The Secretary General sees it as a place where we've had more than 10,000 civilians dead. We know that a large part of that number are children, and they are dead because there is a conflict going on. So I mean, I think he was very clear and used simple words in his statement, and it's based on fact. Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. The U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria have been attacked more than 40 times since mid-October, and the attacks have been claimed by Iran-backed group. After that, the USA carried out a strike against weapons storage facilities in eastern Syria used by Iran's backed group. Any comments on that? And also, do you think this is the war is spreading because Antony Blinken said Iran used that as an excuse to attack U.S. bases?
I think we're very concerned about these developments that we've seen not only in Syria but in Iraq. They are an indication of the risk of further spreading of the conflict that we have seen, and it is incumbent on everyone to respect the territorial integrity of Syria and Iraq, and not to engage in maximum possible restraint, so as not to increase the risk of spreading. Stefano, and then we'll go to the screen.
Thank you, Stefan. It's a long time I don't ask you about Mario Paciolla, but there is a news just came from Rome today. The Rome court rejected the request to close the investigation into the death of the Italian aid worker Paciolla, found dead in Colombia in 2020, where he worked for the United Nations. The judges have ordered an extension of the investigation. Do you have any comment?
No, I hadn't seen that report, just email answers. Let's go to the screen. Joe, you're muted. All right. I will try to come back to you. Let's go to Caitlin.
Thanks, Stefan. Two questions. First, do you have a view on what a minimum pause would be for humanitarian work to be effective? I believe the IRC has said it needs 5 days. It seems it would be useful at a minimum for the UN to define what it needs.
I think we are continue to advocate for a ceasefire. I don't think we're not in the business right now of haggling in terms of time. We want to have sufficient space and, most importantly, sufficient safety guarantees from all that humanitarian aid can be dispersed safely. Your second question.
Any details on the UN's role in the freeing of Luis Diaz's father in Colombia? We saw footage that seemed to show UN workers wearing UN vests, maybe a UN helicopter. What can we know about that?
Yes. In fact, the UN political mission in Colombia worked closely with the Catholic Church, with the government, and with the ELN to release the father of Luis Diaz, the footballer. We, along with the church, were in charge of the actual operation, so we used our helicopters, our planes. Luis's father was taken to one of the UN's regional offices in Valledupar, in the northeast part of Colombia, where he was reunited with his family. The head of the UN's political mission, Carlos Ruiz Massieu, was there, and they were there with the family. We spoke to them a few minutes ago. They reported that Luis Diaz's father was, thank God, in good physical health. And I think the fact that this operation was conducted successfully is an example of the trust that currently exists between all the parties, the ELN delegation, the government, the UN, as well as the Catholic Church in Colombia. And that's it.
Sorry, can I just follow up? So was the UN involved in the negotiations?
I'm not going to go into the discussions, but I can tell you that we were involved in his handing over from the ELN into his freedom.
Stefan, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay, I figured it out. All right. Does the Secretary General still believe that Hamas would be a credible partner in a workable ceasefire when one of its officials was just quoted in an interview with the New York Times as saying, "I hope that the state of war with Israel will become permanent on all the borders." And another senior official said, Hamas's goal is not to run Gaza and to bring it water and electricity and such. What is the Secretary General's reaction to such inflammatory comments?
I think the Secretary General, if you look back at all the comments he has made, has been very clear in condemning the acts of terror that were committed by Hamas, some of the way that Hamas has been conducting its operations also inside Gaza. I would refer you to what he's said previously. It is just a basic point, I think, which doesn't imply a qualitative judgment, but it is, if you are going to work towards a ceasefire, you can only work with those parties who are involved in the firing. Your next question, Joe.
But both parties have to, in good faith, not only agree to it on paper, but implement it. And you have one side saying they believe in perpetual war and they don't care about improving the lives in Gaza.
Predict the future. As I said, I think our position is clear. At least it is to me. Let's continue to the screen. Sharife, you had a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Stefan. If I may, I just want to go back to the White House announcement. They are talking about a humanitarian pause in northern Gaza. And yesterday, when asked about where a possible ceasefire in Gaza will apply to, I recall you said that the integrity of Gaza must be preserved. So in light of this announcement, do you have something to say?
Well, I mean, I have nothing to add to what I said yesterday or today.
But then you...
Twice.
I'm here. I am here.
You're here. Okay, go ahead. And then we'll go to our guests who've been very patient.
I have 2 questions, fast questions. The Secretary General yesterday said to Reuters, he was talking to Reuters, and he said he believed with the number of civilians killed that Israel made a mistake.
I think you were cut off, Abdelhamid. And other people will be my witness. Okay.
You heard me?
No, I did not hear you.
My question.
You were cut off. Yeah, if you could just repeat it quickly because our guests are waiting. Go ahead.
Quickly, this Secretary General yesterday told Reuters that he believed that Israel made a mistake with the number of civilians killed. So Israel made a mistake. What does he mean by that?
I don't think that's the exact quote, and I would encourage you to look at the whole video. And I think if you look at the whole thing, I think what he said would be very clear. Your second question.
Stefan.
Abdelhamid, I'm not hearing you.
Heritage.
Abdelhamid, I'm not hearing you. Okay, I apologize, but I will go get our guests. Thank you. Great. Thank you. I want to thank our guests for their patience. As mentioned, we are delighted to be joined by Rola Dashti, the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Mission for West Asia. And next to her is Abdullah Al-Dardari, the Assistant Secretary General and Head of the Bureau for Arab States at UNDP. And they're here to present you a new report on the socioeconomic impact on Palestine of the current conflict. So, welcome. And I think, Dashti, we're going to start with you.
Thank you.
It's on. Don't worry. You don't have to do anything.
Technology. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. It's clear as the ongoing war on Gaza will have profound preliminary estimates of the socioeconomic impact of the war. I want you to not to forget that the true cost transcends mere numbers. It is measured in the loss of human beings, more than 110,000 Palestinians, and the 14 or 5 Israelis' lives, a loss that we cannot measure. The toll of children is particularly heartbreaking. In just over 4 weeks, the number of children killed in Gaza, which is about 4,300 people, has surpassed the total number of children lost to armed conflict in 22 countries any year since 2020. Moreover, the level of destruction is unimaginable and unprecedented. As of November 3rd of November, it is estimated that 35,000 housing units have been totally demolished, and about 212,000 units are partially damaged. And if this war persists, the majority of Gazans' population might find themselves with nowhere to go to call home or to stay. In addition, a horrifying 96% of the Gazan population now faces unprecedented deprivation of all essential services and has fallen into multidimensional poverty. It doesn't end there. The negative spillover of the war is already reaching neighboring countries, Jordan, Egypt, compounding their socioeconomic and fiscal challenges. Let me conclude with this message. 9.5 million Israelis and 5.5 million Palestinians deserve to live in peace. It's time for the unity of the international community to come together to broker a sustainable peace, ensuring that the cycle of progress, economic development, and social empowerment becomes irreversible for all parties involved. History teaches us that without sustainable peace, all stakeholders in this conflict will not only suffer more loss of lives in the future, but their prospects for sustainable development will also be jeopardized, and their hard-won gains of economic prosperity and social empowerment will be eroded. Now, I would like to invite my colleague Abdullah to provide additional insights and information on the socioeconomic impact of the war. Abdullah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dashti. It's a great pleasure to be here again, and thank you very much for joining us. The numbers tell a very sad story, and we really need to look beyond the numbers. For a region or an economy like the Palestinian economy, not just Gaza, for the Palestinian economy, to lose 4% of GDP in 1 month, that's not comparable to any conflict we have seen before. The Syrian economy used to lose 1% of GDP per month. We have lost already 4% of GDP, not just of Gaza economy. I need to insist, even though the fighting is in Gaza, but the whole Palestinian economy has lost already 4% of GDP. If this fight continues till the end of the second month, the loss will be more than 8% of GDP. And if it continues till the end of the year, we are going to have a 12% loss in GDP. Just to bring it to you, a comparison, Ukraine lost 30% of GDP in 1.5 years of fighting. To lose 12% of GDP in 3 months, that's massive and unprecedented. Along with that, a loss of 390,000 jobs already lost, and an increase of the poverty by more than 400,000 people. Actually, 500,000 people would join the poverty lines by the end of the second month of fighting. Now, even more important, if I may say, is the loss to human development. After 2 months of fighting, Palestine, and not just Gaza, would have lost 16 years of human development. Health and education and infrastructure and economic growth, that would be wiped out. Palestine would go back to 2005. All the investments, all the work, all the hard work of the international community and the Palestinian people will be lost since 2005. 45% of UNDP's projects in Gaza have already been destroyed. Health centers, solar power stations, water treatment plants, and support center to private sector and SMEs and to women in Gaza is lost. So these are the figures that we concluded. The challenge is not here. The challenge is with a Gaza that has % of its houses. We are going to face a long-lasting internal displacement situation in Gaza with all its humanitarian, economic, developmental, and security consequences. To give you an idea of the destruction, the numbers Dr. Rula mentioned, incomparable to another crisis, I'll give you Syria again, it took 4 years of fighting in Syria to lose that percentage of housing that Gaza lost in 1 month. It's unprecedented. So rebuilding that later on, that will be a challenge because we will be living with a long-term humanitarian crisis even after the war ends. The cost of that rebuilding, the conditions of that rebuilding, the parameters of that rebuilding will be something which has to be looked at in an exceptional manner. We cannot repeat the same style and methods again. Just to let me say that in May 2021, in the fighting that took 11 days, 1,700 homes were destroyed in Gaza. Today, only 200 of those were rebuilt. I'm not sure whether those rebuilt have been destroyed again or not, but meaning that if we want to go back to the old style of rebuilding what was destroyed in Gaza, we are facing a long humanitarian, developmental, and economic challenge with security consequences. Let me stop at that and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdallah. Edie Lederer.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the press. I have a couple of questions from both the report and a couple from what you just said. In the release that you sent out, you said that the poverty rate in the state of Palestine will soar by 34% as if it continues for a second month. 34% from what baseline and what kind of numbers are you talking about with that? And maybe you want to answer that and then I'll keep going.
Okay, so when we say 34%, we are comparing that to a business as usual, no war scenario. Right. And the absolute numbers is that we will have additional 500,000 people falling under the poverty line.
In addition to how many before?
The average for Palestine, all of it, was about 34% as well. So we are increasing from Gaza was 61%, West Bank was around 30%, and we have an average 34% increase in those two percentages to give us, unfortunately, additional 500,000 people falling into poverty.
Okay, and of the 61% and the combination of Gaza and the West Bank before,
Yes.
what, in terms of numbers, how many people was that? You're adding 500,000 to what number?
We are at, please.
1.8 million.
1.8 million. Great. Okay, that clears up one question that I think we all wanted to know in terms of the numbers and the baseline. And
Can I add something else before?
Put your microphone.
Sorry. Let me add something else. It's not only the money metric poverty. It is the multidimensional poverty that is more important. And that's what I quoted, 96%. It's almost all Gazan population are drifted to multidimensional poor.
Okay, most of the world doesn't know what multidimensional poverty is.
It's the
Can you please
deprivation.
explain
Okay,
it?
it is the deprivation of various services needs that the people needs. So you're deprived not only from income, but you're deprived from access to health. You're deprived from access to services, utilities. You're deprived from access to transportation, freedom of movement. You're deprived. These are the multidimensional poverty, which is the deprivation that the person is suffering from. So we shifted now most of the people in Gaza now, they are multidimensionally poor, which is multidimensionally deprived of various essential services for livelihood. And this is the key, in addition to the deprivation of income that Abdullah and I just mentioned to you, that we drifted, that in total in Palestine. These are only deprived from income. But we're talking about additional deprivation of the result of the war on that, which is massive. And as Abdullah said, even if we have a ceasefire today, okay, and rebuilding starts, that deprivation, yes, will improve, but we will not move more than, we will shift from 96% to around 60%.
Okay, and what was the multidimensional poverty rate before October 7th?
Before October 7th, it was around 45%.
And that was throughout the Palestinian territories or just in Gaza?
No, Palestinian territory.
Okay. And on what was the Palestinian GDP before October 7th?
It was $20.4 billion. 18% of it is in Gaza, and the rest is from the West Bank. So again, that gives you an idea about the proportion of the shock, that a shock of destruction in one small part of less than 20% of the economy caused all that damage in the whole of the economy.
And why is that? Is that because of the fallout of what happened on October 7th and afterwards on the West Bank?
Of course, because you have, of course, the impact on what we call capital stock accumulation. When you lose that, the GDP automatically is affected, but also massive disruption to the economy in the West Bank. You know that now is supposed to be the season for olive and citrus. Farmers cannot really go and collect their products, their produce. The tourism season is practically gone, and that agriculture and tourism represent 40% of the GDP in the West Bank. So we put all these, and of course disruption to trade, disruption to transfer of money from the Israeli authorities to the Palestinian Authority. Putting all of that, it's a massive shock. Physical destruction in Gaza, economic disruption in the West Bank.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please, Dawn. You asked a lot of questions. Maybe you covered everybody's questions, Edie. Yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Dardari. You talked about the cost of rebuilding, and if I heard you correctly, you said, you know, we can't do it the same old way. How do you, you're laughing, how do you suggest it be done differently? And I also wanted to ask, it just seems like even if and when this ends, there's just going to be a long period of time where people are just so completely dependent on assistance that when it gets back up and running again to normal, whatever that is, it's going to take forever, a long time. What's your response?
But that's the main message of what we are trying to put here. We're putting the numbers, but the interpretation of those numbers is exactly what you said. First, rebuilding needs to be thought of from now, and we are already thinking about that. Second, this has to be a rebuilding that's owned by the people of Gaza, done by the people of Gaza. It is not a large real estate project. This has to be a participatory approach rebuilding from the bottom up. And that requires access to finance, access to resources, access to technical assistance, and all of these things that we will be detailing in the next reports. But all what we are saying here, as you can see clearly, every day of delay means increasing the difficulties after the war. So the war would continue in different forms, in a sense, because that humanitarian trap people will find themselves in, and that dependence will be something we're strangulating, and we need to make sure that we address that in our thinking from now.
So when you say that this isn't a real estate project, who steps in when, you know, Gaza has beaches? Maybe you want to, not you, but I'm saying real estate opportunity, build a house. Who steps in and says, no, we're not doing it this way?
So I'll say one word on this, and Dr. Dashti will address that as well. Our experience in reconstruction, even though it's not the topic of the report, but the report sheds the light on the challenges later on, as you just said. Our experience in reconstruction around the world is that a top-down reconstruction that does not consider the ownership of the people and the participation of the people and the opinion of the people in that reconstruction, it will produce what we call structural deformities later on. So let's try to avoid it and make sure it's fast, it's effective, it's owned by the people, it is done by the people. But we are not against hotels on the beach, that's for sure.
Sky News Arabia, please.
Thank you,
Steve.
Sorry, please, hold on 2 seconds, please, go ahead.
Okay, just to add to what Abdullah is saying, we don't want to go to the same path of recovery. Just putting funding and do the recovery without addressing the root cause of the problem will get us back after a couple of years to more losses of lives, to more damages. And when Abdullah was talking about the 16 years of loss of development, we're talking about around $45 to $50 billion that has invested in development during this 15 years. So if we don't address the root causes and that's what our call for the international community to unite, to broker a sustainable peace, so that these developments that we're doing, these recoveries that we're doing, becomes irreversible. So that's what we want to maintain. We want to maintain that the people of Palestine, the people of Israel also live in peace. Because as the damage is occurring at the front of the Palestinian to the war, the same thing, the economy of Israel is also impacted. So we just need to make sure there is a sustainable peace so that people will live safe, reap the benefit of prosperity, the sustainable development, the investment of it. And this is what we want. We want to have a different mindset to ensure that the recovery that we will work on, and all of us are investing in that, to last.
Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Stephen. Majdi Azaji with Sky News Arabia. Thank you both for doing this. Dr. Rola, my question is to you. It's about the social impact, and especially for the kids. Do we have any numbers about the Gazans kids? How many of them lost both of their parents or one of their parents? And also, is there any UN organizations taking care of those kids who've lost their parents in this war? Thank you.
Okay. We do have, unfortunately, the number of kids who have died, the 4,300 plus individuals. But the mere virtue of 10,000 people are killed, and if you take away from them the 4,300, then you're left almost with 6,000 individuals. These are mothers, fathers of these kids. So you're almost having also around 6,000 plus of kids that they are at least missing one parent. Okay, so, and this, we're talking about UNRWA and other UN agencies, our UNICEF and UNRWA and other agencies of the UN will be working together at the recovery to look into the states of the kids.
Just a follow-up, is there any mechanism right now on the ground to take care of those kids?
Hopefully we'll have a humanitarian ceasefire to start taking of the kids.
Thank you. Stefano?
Stefano Maccara, Voce New York. For both of you, what should happen to Hamas before, I mean, for you to, let's say there is a ceasefire that everybody is here looking for. Before he started to start this reconstruction, involve the Palestinian, all the things he said, what do you think should happen to Hamas?
First of all, that's up to the Palestinian people. We are saying clearly that the reconstruction should be owned by the people and should be participated through their... So that's up to the Palestinian people. We here are providing a technical analysis of the numbers that we have faced so far. And what do they mean? By the way, even if the fighting stops now, 2024, Palestinian economy will lose another 9%. So this is not only a 3 months impact. We will have a longer term impact for next year, and even in 2025 we will have such an impact. So that's what we are, at least the two agencies are concerned with.
Thank you. Deji?
Mr. Adadari, actually, this is the issue with China Central Television. Actually, I don't have a question just now, but now I have one. Because according to your description, you mentioned many times of Syrian situation comparing to Gaza. But we know that in Syria, when we're talking about children, there's like a lost generation whose lack of education. I think it's basically the same in Gaza because of the blockade. So given that condition and given all this blockade in the past few years and now the Gaza war, do you think how much time, if today, just like you said, if today they started the ceasefire, could Gaza recover from this situation to a, how to say that, a normal condition as other countries and nations?
May I? As we speak, our teams are doing those calculations because we will be producing in the next 3 to 4 weeks another report updating the Palestine numbers and look at the regional impact on the economies of the region of what we are seeing. But all I can say that if we can stop today is better than stopping tomorrow, because and this is again unique in conflicts, and I personally have covered and written on and did a PhD and all these things in post-conflict reconstruction. This time we are calculating by days. When you have a 4% reduction in GDP in 1 month, and 45% loss to your housing stock in 1 month, the reconstruction should be calculated by day. So the delay, a 1-day delay now, could mean months and years later on. And we will come back to you in the following report with an estimate. What does every day of delay in fighting now mean for how much money and how many weeks or months of delay and reconstruction that we are going to face? But it's massive. I mean, this is, I'd like to state, this is unprecedented.
Thank you. Okay, Edie, and then, go ahead, Edie.
One figure I forgot to ask you. What is the poverty level that you're using? There was something in the report that talked about medium level countries.
Yes.
So what actually is the figure? How much money is it?
It's a middle-income country poverty assessment, poverty level, which is $6 per day per person.
And the Palestinian territories were considered
a middle-income, lower middle-income economy. So that the $6, and that even breaks your heart even more, because all of that growth and development is going to regress between 11, 16, or even 19 years if the fights continues till the end of the year. We will go back to 2002.
Stefano, and then we'll close it out.
Just a follow up on my question, because I'm not sure if I understood. So what you're saying is, you say basically is to Palestinians decide what happened to Hamas. So because we're talking here about reconstruction, and you're saying better today than tomorrow, start today than tomorrow. Basically, are you saying that you as a UN will be ready to start reconstruction with Hamas still, let's say, in charge of Gaza, and maybe even with 220 people hostages and so on? I mean, with a situation like this, you are ready too, because if they are in charge, basically they will be in charge also of reconstruction. So are you saying this?
Is that reconstruction and the fighting should stop immediately if we can, from a technical, economic point of view, from a developmental point of view. Fighting should stop now. People are hungry, and we are losing, children are becoming stunted, and the impacts will be long-term. Now, how and which shape and which governance framework will run that operation after the peace is up to the political side of the House, not up to us. We only do the economic and technical and social impact of this conflict.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Before he does that, delegations are reminded that the time limit for the introduction of draft proposals is 3 minutes, as was decided at our organizational meeting on the 28th of September. So it is 3 minutes to introduce draft proposals. So I now call the distinguished representative, permanent representative of Indonesia, to introduce the draft resolutions. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Chair. It is an honor for Indonesia, along with South Africa, and on behalf of the co-sponsors, to introduce draft resolution under Agenda Item 49, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, as contained in document L10, L11, L12 for adoption by the Fourth Committee and recommendations to the General Assembly. These draft resolutions takes on added relevance in light of the extremely grave situation being faced by Palestine refugees, particularly in the Gaza Strip, as well as the central role of UNRWA in alleviating their plight through the provision of life-saving humanitarian assistance, protection, and emergency shelter. At this time, more than 730,000 Palestinian civilians are sheltering in 151 UNRWA schools and facilities in Gaza. They are amongst the 1.5 million forcibly displaced from their homes by Israeli aggression against Gaza over the past month and has resulted in a humanitarian catastrophe. The horrific events of these past weeks underscores yet again UNRWA's indispensable humanitarian and stabilizing role, that extraordinary work of UNRWA staff, even at their own lives, and must be recognized. We mourn the loss of 99 UNRWA staff members and pay tribute to their service to the Palestinian refugees as they bravely upheld UNRWA's mandate, which remains essential until just solution is realized. Chair, the draft before the committee are based on the resolution of the 74th session with only minimal technical update as needed. The draft resolution reaffirms the right of the Palestinian refugees in accordance with international law and the General Assembly Resolution 194, and reaffirm the international community's long-standing support for UNRWA and its operations and programs aimed at ensuring the well-being, protection, and the development of the Palestine refugee in light of their prolonged displacement and continued deprivation of rights. In the past month, Israel's violation not only persisted and escalated but have reached unprecedented level, as witnessed in the high rate of civilian casualties in Gaza, particularly women and children. The dire situation in Gaza, which continues to dramatically deteriorate as the occupying power continues to defy global calls for a ceasefire, as demanded by the General Assembly on the 27th of October, is a reminder that this is exactly the moment where UNRWA needs your unwavering support. Madam Chair, draft resolution L11 entitled Assistance to Palestine Refugee is presented to the committee for its valuable consideration and endorsement. The draft reaffirms the core principles regarding the Palestine refugees and UNRWA's mandate. The Assembly notes with regret the appreciation that rapid repatriation and compensation of the refugee, as provided in paragraph 11 of the General Assembly Resolution 194, has yet to take effect, that the situation of Palestine refugee remains a matter of grave concern. The refugee continues to require assistance to meet basic health, education, and living needs. The Assembly therefore reaffirms the need for continuation of UNRWA's work and its unimpeded operation and provision of services for the well-being, protection, and human development of the Palestine refugees and for the stability of the region. Draft L11 also reiterates the call on donors to continue to generously contribute and strengthen support to UNRWA in light of the distress and growing needs of Palestine refugees in increasing expenditures in all 5 fields of operation in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. It is the sincere hope of all the co-sponsors that these important draft resolution will again receive strong support, reaffirming the international community long-standing and principled support for the Palestine refugees and for UNRWA's pending a just solution for their plight. Chair, the second resolution under the item is draft resolution L12, titled Palestine Refugees, Properties and Their Revenues. Once again, this draft recalls Resolution 194 and subsequent relevant resolutions, and the principles that no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her properties, and thus reaffirm the Palestine refugees are entitled to their property and income derived therefrom. The Secretary General is requested to take all appropriate steps for the protection of Arabs' properties and assets, and the two sides are urged to address the issue of Palestine refugees' properties in the final status of negotiation. Madam Chair, I now wish to share the floor with the distinguished representative of South Africa to present one remaining resolution submitted under this item.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative, permanent DPR. I was promoting him. Of South Africa to make a presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Madam Chairperson, distinguished delegations. This is an honor for South Africa to make this presentation on behalf of 59 co-sponsors, including my own country. We do so with unwavering support for the inalienable rights of Palestinian people, including the Palestinian refugees, and for the international community's efforts to promote the achievement of those rights and a just, lasting, peaceful solution to this conflict, which is long overdue. I present to the committee draft resolution L10 entitled Operations of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, addressing the main aspects of UNRWA's operations and the challenges it is facing across its fields of operation in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Madam Chairperson, my delegation introduces this resolution today as UNRWA personnel continues to be killed by Israel's current military assault and bombardment of Gaza. Since our meeting on Monday, this number has increased from 89 to 99. It is important that delegations keep this in mind as we adopt this resolution today. Madam Chairperson, the draft before us reaffirms that the delivery of assistance by UNRWA remains essential for alleviating the plight of more than 5.9 million Palestinian refugees registered with the agency and for regional stability against a backdrop of continuing crises and conflict and serious socio-economic deterioration in the region, as well as the current unprecedented suffering inflicted on the population of Gaza. The draft also calls upon UNRWA to continue to provide assistance to Palestinians displaced as a result of the June 1967 and subsequent hostilities, and reaffirms the right of the displaced persons to return to their homes in the territories occupied by Israel. Concern is also expressed about the regrettable ongoing attempts to discredit the agency despite its proven exemplary record of service and ongoing breaches of the inviolability of its premises. The draft recalls the relevant articles of the UN Charter as well as the UN Convention on Privileges and Immunities and relevant resolutions on the safety and security of humanitarian personnel and protection of UN personnel. Israel, the occupying power, is called on to cease obstruction of the agency's work, comply fully with provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and ensure the safety of UNRWA personnel and installations. Finally, all states, the specialized agencies, and non-governmental organizations are again urged to support UNRWA's valuable work. Donors are called upon for full and timely contributions, encouraged to provide early annual contributions and multi-year funding, and states and organizations not currently contributing to the agency are urged to make a voluntary contribution. Madam Chairperson, I conclude with a strong appeal on behalf of the co-sponsors for delegations' principled support for this important draft resolution. Now, more than ever, UNRWA is the first line of assistance of the most basic and critical humanitarian services towards those suffering, especially in Gaza, due to the ongoing bombardment and ground attack. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ambassador Nasser of Indonesia and the DPR of South Africa for introducing L10, L11, and L12. Distinguished delegates, the committee will now proceed to take a decision on the 3 draft proposals just introduced under item 49, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, contained in the documents A/C4/78L10 through to L12. Recorded votes have been requested on these three drafts. First, I open the floor to the delegations wishing to make a general statement on any or all of the three draft resolutions submitted under Agenda Item 49, contained in documents L10 through to L12. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Israel.
Thank you. Once again, after so many representatives have paid lip service to the Palestinians by emitting their venom against Israel, the automatic anti-Israeli majority here in the UN will ensure that all 6 draft resolutions will be passed in this committee this morning, regardless of their content or the actual situation on the ground. My mission, however, calls upon all decent, democratic, fair and peace-loving member states to vote against these resolutions. And this year, we call upon you to do so, not only because of the lies, fabrications, the demonizing language, and the adoption of a one-sided narrative, but because of what is not mentioned in the resolutions, despite the Hamas terrorist attack on southern Israel on 7th October. There is no mention of the so many war crimes committed by Hamas, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the 1,400 murdered by Hamas, including 287 foreign nationals, and more than 7,000 wounded, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of whole families being burnt alive by drugged-up Hamas terrorists, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of babies being murdered in their cots, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the deliberate shooting at Israeli ambulances and the 3 times that an Israeli hospital has been hit by rockets fired from Gaza, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of Israeli women raped and paraded through the streets of Gaza and the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, so vote against the resolutions. There is no call for the immediate unconditional release of all of the 240 hostages in Gaza, including elderly, some of them Holocaust survivors, sick, women, children, and even babies, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the more than 9,500 rockets fired since 7th of October from Gaza aimed at Israeli civilian areas, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the more than 600 of these rockets that have misfired and impacted in Gaza, killing and maiming Palestinians, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the exploitation of aid by Hamas for its terror activities, including UN facilities, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the terrorist infrastructure built by Hamas in proximity to and even in and under hospitals, mosques, schools, including those of UNRWA, and other civilian facilities, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of Hamas using Palestinians, including women and children, as human shields and shooting to kill at some of those trying to flee war zones, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of Hamas stockpiling over 500,000 litres of fuel, but also stealing fuel from UNRWA and other hospitals at the expense of Palestinians in need for use in the upkeep of its terror tunnels and the manufacture of weapons, rockets and explosives, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention of the moral failure of the Palestinian Authority to condemn terror unequivocally, so vote against these resolutions. There is no mention of the destructive role of Iran that has bankrolled, armed and trained Hamas and has unleashed its proxies in Lebanon, Syria and Yemen to further terror against Israel and other countries in the region, so vote against the resolutions. There is no mention that these resolutions are promoted by systematic violators of any law and human rights known to man, even against their own people. Amongst them, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. For all these reasons, I call upon member states to vote against these resolutions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Israel for his statement, and I now call upon the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom will maintain its voting positions on these three resolutions in line with our long-standing approach to and support of the two-state solution, which remains the only viable long-term solution. We welcome the approach of the Permanent Observer State of Palestine in the provision of technical rollovers of these texts and recognise that their language does not reflect the current context in Israel and Gaza. Our voting on today's resolution does not undermine our enduring solidarity with Israel and in the wake of Hamas's heinous terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. Alongside our ongoing support for Israel's right to self-defense against terrorism, we continue to be clear that Israel must act in line with international humanitarian law and take every feasible precaution to avoid harming civilians. We continue to underline, in parallel to our support of today's resolution, that Hamas does not speak or act in the interest of the Palestinian people. Hamas's deliberate murder and kidnapping of innocent people in Israel now callously puts civilians in Gaza at risk. We express our pain at seeing so many innocent lives destroyed on and since the 7th of October and reiterate our support for the Palestinian Authority as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Palestinian civilians are experiencing a devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza and violence is rising in the West Bank. We strongly condemn settler violence against Palestinians and maintain our long-standing position that settlements are illegal under international law and contrary to the cause of peace. To prevent further spread of the conflict, the UK will continue to invest all efforts for a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The UK will work with our partners towards a two-state solution based on 1967 lines with Jerusalem as a shared capital, which provides justice and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colleagues, I'd like to make a few remarks at this time relating to both Agenda Item 49 pertaining to UNRWA and Agenda 50 pertaining to Israeli practices. As we stated earlier this week, one-sided resolutions, whether put forward in the Security Council or here in our General Assembly's Fourth Committee, will not help to advance peace. Not when they ignore facts on the ground. One-sided resolutions only perpetuate long-standing lines of division at a moment when we urgently need to work together. Today's slate of resolutions includes such one-sided texts. Let us be clear. There are no shortcuts to a two-state solution, and this package of resolutions will neither advance peace nor create the conditions for negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians. The United States opposes any and all resolutions that are one-sided or seek to hold Israel to a standard not expected of other countries. The United States will abstain on the resolution entitled Assistance to the Palestine Refugees and vote against the Operations of UNRWA resolution. We oppose the latter resolution because it prejudges final status issues that should be determined through negotiations between the parties, not via the General Assembly. These votes should not be interpreted as a lack of confidence in or support for UNRWA, which serves as an essential stabilizing role across the region. Excuse me. More than 90 UNRWA staff have lost their lives in the past month, and thousands are putting their lives on the line every day to help the people of Gaza. The United States conveys our deepest condolences to those who have lost loved ones and colleagues. We have extraordinary admiration for the courage of UNRWA's staff, and I want to underscore our support for UNRWA's work. Lives are hanging in the balance every single day. We must all step up to provide additional funding, as the United States has done. We are proud to be the single largest donor to Palestinian refugees, having contributed more than $1 billion to UNRWA since 2021. And President Biden recently announced an additional $100 million in humanitarian assistance for Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. We encourage all member states to increase their financial support to UNRWA, including to both emergency appeal and the core budget. Many countries in this room offer rhetorical support to UNRWA, but have provided precious little support to the organization. Too many states laud UNRWA and call for increased humanitarian assistance without providing contributions themselves. We call on member states to match their rhetorical support for UNRWA with concrete financial support. We continue to support UNRWA's reform efforts that strengthen the agency's accountability and transparency. We also underscore the need for the agency to continue to work strictly in line with the humanitarian principles of neutrality, independence, humanity, and impartiality. Madam Chair, in the 2 weeks since the United States helped reach agreement with Israel, Egypt, and the UN on ways to get humanitarian aid to civilians in need, the UN has made life-saving deliveries. Still, the volume of aid entering Gaza is not enough, and we are pressing to increase the number of deliveries and to restore basic services to civilians. During his recent visit to the region, Secretary Blinken spoke to leaders about tangible steps that can be taken to increase the sustained delivery of food, water, medicine, fuel, and other essential needs, while also putting in place measures to prevent diversion of these resources by Hamas and other terrorist groups. We've identified mechanisms to enable fuel to reach hospitals and to meet other urgent needs in the South. These mechanisms need to be fully operationalized. President Biden has expressed his support for humanitarian pauses in the fighting in Gaza to allow hostages to get out, to allow humanitarian aid to get in and distributed, and to allow safe passage for civilians. Colleagues, we firmly
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've asked for the floor in order to ask the colleagues here in the room to vote in favor of the draft resolutions that they have before them. It's not right at the present time to question the content of the resolutions because they have specific weaknesses. We all know that it's precisely because of that content, because of that absent content, that the Security Council has not been able to adopt a resolution in this General Assembly. And nor do we mention in this resolution the 10,328 Palestinians who have been killed in the last month. And so I ask you to vote in favor. They don't mention the 4,000 children, 4,000 Palestinian children who were killed, and I ask you to vote in favor. They don't mention more than 100 workers from the United Nations also killed, who deserve our vote in favor. Nor does it mention the more than 18,000 tons of explosives that are the equivalent of 1.5 times the intensity of the nuclear bomb that was launched in Hiroshima in this resolution. And so I ask you to vote in favor of the text. Madam Chair, I'd like to conclude with a sentence from the Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro, leader of the Cuban Revolution, in the 6th summit of the Movement of Non-Aligned Countries in 1979, almost 15 years later, that is still fully applicable today. And he said, Fidel said, there's no worse deprivation of a people has been committed in this century. And let us understand that we are not fanatics. The Cuban revolutionary movement has always been dedicated to eliminating racial discrimination and hatred. And from the bottom of our hearts, we reject with all our force the ruthless persecution and genocide that Nazism launched against the Jewish people, but I can't remember anything else, anything worse in our contemporary history than the evacuation and genocide that is being carried out and that's being carried out by Zionism against the Palestinian people. deprived of their lands, expelled from their land, dispersed throughout the world, persecuted and killed. The heroic Palestinian people are an impressive example of selflessness and patriotism, and they are the living symbol of the greatest crime of our time. And for this reason, Madam Chair, I would ask our colleagues to vote in favor of this draft resolution. Thank you very much.
I thank the DPR of Cuba for his statement. Distinguished delegates, the committee will now proceed to take a decision on the three draft proposals just introduced under item 49, United Nations Relief and Works for Palestine refugees in the Near East. We will begin with draft resolution A/C4/78/L10 entitled Operations of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. I now request the Secretary to announce the additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L10.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution A/C4/78/L10 in the committee's e-delegate portal are now, in a minute, are now reflected on the screen. Allow me to read them out. Bahrain, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Comoros, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Gambia, Greece, Iceland, Indonesia, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Malta, the Netherlands, Norway, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, and Vietnam. Other delegations not already reflected on the screen wishing to co-sponsor L10 should signify by pressing their microphone button now. Chair, I see North Macedonia, Libya, and that will be all. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary of the Committee. Distinguished delegates, we shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution L10, please signify, and those against, and those for abstentions.
The committee is now voting on draft resolution L10 entitled Operations of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 160, against, 4, abstentions,
The system is
playing games.
7.
7. Thanks, PR of Poland. Abstentions is 7, colleagues. The resolution is adopted. L10 is adopted. The committee will now take action on draft resolution A/C4/78/L11 entitled Assistance to Palestine Refugees. And I now give the floor to the Secretary to announce the additional co-sponsor of draft resolution L11.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L11 on the committee's e-delegate portal are now reflected on the screen. Allow me to read them out. Bahrain, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Comoros, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Greece, Gambia, Finland, France, Gambia, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Malta, Monaco, the Netherlands, Norway, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sudan, Sweden, United Arab Emirates, and Vietnam. Other delegations not reflected on the screen wishing to co-sponsor draft resolution L11 should signify by pressing their microphone button now. Chair, I see Libya. And that would be all.
I thank the Secretary of the Committee. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution L11, please signify. Those against also, and abstentions.
The committee is now The committee is now voting on draft resolution L11 entitled Assistance to Palestine Refugees. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 161, against 1, abstention 11. Draft resolution L11 is adopted. The committee will now take action on draft resolution A/C4/78/L12 entitled Palestinian Refugees, Properties and Their Revenues. I now give the floor to the Secretary of the Committee to announce the additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L12.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L12 on the committee's e-delegate portal are reflected on the screen. Allow me to read them out. We have Bahrain, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Brazil, Brunei Darussalam, Bulgaria, Comoros, Croatia, Cyprus, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Gambia, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, Latvia, Liechtenstein, Malaysia, Luxembourg, Malaysia, Malta, Netherlands, Norway, Pakistan, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Serbia, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Sudan, Sweden, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates, and Vietnam. Other delegations not reflected on the screen wishing to co-sponsor L12 should signify by pressing their microphone button now. Chair, I see Libya. That will be all. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary of the Committee. We shall now begin the voting process on this draft. Those in favor of draft resolution L12, please signify. Those against and those for abstentions.
The committee is now voting on draft resolution L12 entitled Palestine Refugees' Properties and Their Revenues. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the board? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 156, against, 6, abstention, 8. The draft resolution is adopted. Distinguished delegates, I now give the floor to delegations wishing to explain their vote after the vote on any or all of the 3 draft resolutions just adopted under item 49. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Libya.
I'm so sorry, it was like a mistake. So.
Okay. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Canada's vote today in favor of the resolution entitled Assistance to Palestinian Refugees reflects our longstanding commitment to ensure that millions of Palestinian refugees benefit from basic services in terms of healthcare, education, relief, and social services, as well as emergency assistance. Given the conflict and the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, Canada feels it's important to recognize the vital role which is played by UNRWA in providing emergency humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians. Supporting the organization has never been more important while the conflict between Israel and Hamas is entering its 6th week. This war began after the brutal terrorist attacks by Hamas against Israel on the 7th of October, which we continue to condemn firmly and unequivocally. We recognize the right of Israel to defend itself in accordance with international humanitarian law, and we call for the release of all hostages. At the present time, UNRWA is playing a crucial role in helping to preserve the lives of civilians. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is only getting worse, and we are calling upon all the parties to protect civilians and to respect international humanitarian law. We express our sincere condolences to the families and to the loved ones of all of the victims of this conflict, including the more than 90 members of UNRWA staff who have been killed in these last few weeks. More than 10,000 people have been killed thus far, and thousands of others have been injured, and roughly 1.5 million Palestinians have been forced to leave their homes. The majority of them do not have access to basic goods which are essential to their survival. Canada welcomes the deliveries of humanitarian assistance received thus far in Gaza. It's a positive step, but we need much more. We call for a humanitarian pause in order to make it possible to deliver fuel, water, and other indispensable humanitarian goods to Gaza.
Canada has announced $60 million in humanitarian assistance to address the urgent needs of vulnerable civilians affected by this crisis. UNRWA will be one of those recipients. This builds upon the $100 million multi-year contribution to UNRWA that Canada announced earlier this year. Canada stands ready and will do more. Canada places great importance on UNRWA's ability to uphold UN values and humanitarian principles, including the principle of neutrality. For Canada, it is critically important that development and humanitarian funds are used for their intended purposes and that they reach those in need. Canada's support to UNRWA directly contributes to ensuring the neutrality of UNRWA activities. Canadian funding strengthens UNRWA staff's ability to identify, monitor, and follow up on neutrality violations and improve transparency and accountability of UNRWA's approach to humanitarian principles. Moreover, we would like to underscore our long-standing concern that there are still too many resolutions related to the Arab-Israeli conflict being put forward at the General Assembly every year, and too many of these are also unfairly single out Israel. Canada reiterates the importance of a fair-minded approach at the United Nations and will continue to vote no on resolutions that do not address the complexity of the issues or seek to address the actions and responsibilities of all parties, including the destructive role of terrorist organizations like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah. Canada remains committed to the goal of a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East, including the creation of a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. I thank you. Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
I thank the DPR of Canada for his statement. And I now give the floor to the distinguished observer of the State of Palestine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. But I want to give one statement after we finish the voting on the second item. Thank you very much.
The committee has thus concluded its consideration of agenda item 49. Distinguished delegates, we now turn to the draft resolutions submitted under item 50, Israeli practices and settlement activities affecting the rights of Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba to introduce draft resolution A/C4/78/L14 entitled The Occupied Syrian Golan, and draft resolution A/C4/78/L3 entitled Work of the Special Committee to Investigate Israeli Practices Affecting the Human Rights of the Palestinian People and Other Arabs of the Occupied Territories. You have the floor, DPR.
Gracias, thank you, Madam Chairman. I have the honor of making this general introduction with respect to the draft resolution L13 entitled the work of the Special Committee in charge of investigating the Israeli practices that affect the human rights of the Palestinian people and other Arabs of the occupied territories, which was presented to the committee for its consideration under agenda item 50. As reflected in our discussion on this item, there is a general international concern with respect to the illegal policies and measures taken up by Israel in the territory that has been occupied since 1967, and with the severe impact on human rights, as well as the humanitarian and socioeconomic conditions of the civilian population that is found under that illegal occupation. In the draft resolution that you have before you, we look at the serious and systematic violations of international law, and in particular the humanitarian law, as well as the norms of human rights committed by Israel, the occupying power, in the context of the foreign military occupation of the Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, as well as the Syrian Golan since 1967. Now, these violations have been fully documented by different agencies of the United Nations, as well as human rights international organizations and humanitarian organizations. And we have the reports of the Special Committee and the Secretary General. And that we also have relevant reports presented by the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur of the Human Rights Council on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. In the period covered by the report of the Special Committee, A7853, all of these violations have been intensified, and the human rights crisis has deepened and has affected particularly the Palestinian civilian occupation under Israeli occupation. The events that have taken place in the last month show another side of the destructive and mortal violence and the incalculable loss of human life, and is a painful reflection of the volatility and general weakness of the situation that prevails, and the deep human suffering that is leading to the loss of lives of innocent children and others. Now, as the suffering continues, the beliefs of the Palestinian people is declining when it comes to the possibility of a fair peace. As Israel intensifies its indiscriminate attacks against the civilian population of Gaza, we see on a daily basis war crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts that can be qualified as genocide, and the possibility of a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders is becoming an illusion. This means that international action, in accordance with international law, including the relevant UN resolutions, they are even more urgent and necessary. In the draft resolution that you have before you, there is a call for Israel, the occupying power, to respect their legal obligations, and for the international community to adopt measures to guarantee that respect in accordance with international law and the obligations that states have in this area. The greatest priority of this committee and of the Assembly of the United Nations as a whole, is to try to achieve an immediate ceasefire in Palestine and to put an end to the suffering of the civilian population, to the inhuman and genocidal blockade of the Gaza Strip and the loss of innocent lives. We hope that the draft resolution L13, which we are on the verge of adopting, we hope that it will continue and contribute to this aim. I also have the honor of introducing a draft resolution L14 entitled the Occupied Syrian Golan, which was presented to the committee for its approval under agenda item 50 of the program. With respect to the text, this year we have not introduced any changes of the wording, with the exception of the updating of certain dates and figures. In the draft resolution, we express the deep concern of the General Assembly for the fact that the occupied Syrian Golan, occupied since 1967, has continued under Israeli military occupation, and we recall previous resolutions where, among other matters, they demand that Israel put an end to its occupation of the Arab territories. The suffering of the Syrian population under Israeli occupation in the Syrian Golan has continued for more than half a century. In the occupied Syrian Golan, there are still activities involving Israeli settlements, and Syrians there are subject to horrible repressive policies, to racial discrimination, to detention, torture, and the deprivation of their natural resources, including oil, gas, and water. They are deprived of the right to learn according to the Syrian educational plan, as well as the right to carry their national identity document. Also, the Israeli occupying power prevents the Red Crescent from establishing clinics and hospitals in the occupied Syrian Golan. The worsening, unprecedented escalation of the Israeli occupation authorities in the occupied Syrian Golan, their persistent activities of the settlements and their flagrant violations are war crimes. This escalation has been seen in the seizure of land and property, the demographic alteration, and the suppression of natural resources, which perpetuates the occupation of the Syrian Golan. In keeping with international law, the occupied Syrian Golan is an indivisible part of the Syrian Arab Republic, and we hope to be able, as always, to enjoy the majority support of the delegations present in this room in order to contribute to putting an end to so much injustice. Thank you very much.
I thank the DPR of Cuba for introducing the draft resolutions. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia to introduce draft resolution A/C4/78/L15 entitled Israeli Settlements in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan. You have the floor.
Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the co-sponsors, it is an honor for Namibia, along with Cuba, to present the draft resolutions submitted to the Special Political and Decolonization Committee for endorsement under Agenda Item 50, as contained in documents L13, L14, and L15. From the onset, I must highlight the grave conditions under which we introduced these resolutions this year. In the past year, Israeli violations not only persisted and escalated in flagrant disregard of the General Assembly and Security Council's repeated calls for cessation of violations and for respect by Israel, the occupying power, of its international legal obligations, but actually reached unprecedented levels, as witnessed in the high rates of killings of Palestinian civilians in the West Bank, detention and imprisonment of Palestinians, including children, and expansion and construction of colonial settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and in the occupied Syrian Golan. This has been particularly evident over the past month. Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, the draft resolution contained in document L15, entitled Israeli Settlements in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan, reflects the severity of the current situation and the imperative for measures of accountability in line with international law to bring a halt to these violations, protect Palestinian civilians, and enable the attainment of justice and peace. While this committee has annually deliberated on this agenda item, the urgency of its work on these matters in this session cannot be understated, as the situation on the ground worsens year after year with no end in sight for Israel's military occupation, now in its 56th year, and its unlawful policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, which continue to violate the human rights of the Palestinian people, to ravage humanitarian, socioeconomic, and security conditions, and to thwart the achievement of a just solution. As affirmed in the reports before this committee, Palestinian civilians, including children and women, continue to be arrested, detained, and imprisoned, subjected to deplorable conditions and untold human rights abuses. Israel's now 16-year illegal blockade of the Gaza Strip also continues in collective punishment of over 2 million Palestinians, violating their human rights and plunging the humanitarian situation to lower depths every year, with poverty and despair widespread, in addition to the violence, trauma, and destruction inflicted by repeated Israeli military aggressions, the latest in August of this year. Israel also persists with its settlement campaign in grave breach of international law, constructing settlements, transferring Israeli settlers to the occupied territory, demolishing homes, seizing land and properties, and forcibly dispossessing and displacing hundreds more Palestinians. Such illegal colonization and annexation measures are also destroying the contiguity of the Palestinian land, further undermining the prospects for realizing the two-state solution on the pre-1967 borders and obstructing the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. This appalling and inhumane situation has been thoroughly documented by UN agencies and international as well as Palestinian and Israeli human rights and humanitarian organizations. It is attested to in the reports of the Special Committee and Secretary General, as well as relevant reports by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, the Independent Commission of Inquiry, and the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. The resolution thus reiterates the General Assembly's calls for compliance by Israel, the occupying power, with the UN Charter and all other international legal obligations, including as per the 4th Geneva Convention, the Human Rights Covenants and the relevant UN resolutions, and for serious efforts to be exerted, including measures of accountability, to contribute towards the achievement of a just, comprehensive, lasting and peaceful solution to end this historic and tragic injustice. On behalf of the co-sponsors, Namibia urges the strong support of Member States for this important draft resolution, as well as for the other draft resolutions under this item. And I thank you.
I thank the ambassador guest, the representative of Namibia, for introducing L15. Distinguished delegates, the committee will now proceed to take action on 3 draft resolutions tabled under agenda item 50, which were just introduced. Recorded votes have also been requested on all of them. First, I call on delegations wishing to make general statement on any or all of these draft resolutions submitted under agenda item 50. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chairman, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. The European Union strongly condemns, in the strongest possible terms, Hamas and its brutal, indiscriminate terrorist attacks across Israel. There is no justification for terror. The use of civilians as human shields by Hamas is a particularly deplorable atrocity. The EU strongly emphasizes Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law and international humanitarian law. We reiterate our call on Hamas to immediately release all hostages, many of whom are EU citizens, without any precondition. The European Union expresses its grave concern for the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza and calls for continued, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access and aid to reach those in need through all the necessary measures, including humanitarian corridors and pauses for humanitarian needs. The European Union will work closely with partners in the region to protect civilians, to provide assistance and facilitate access to food, water, medical care, fuel, and shelter, ensuring that such assistance is not abused by terrorist organizations. The European Union recalls the need to avoid regional escalation and to engage with partners in this respect, including with the Palestinian Authority. The European Union is ready to contribute to reviving a political process on the basis of a two-state solution, including through the Peace Day effort, and welcomes diplomatic peace and security initiatives and supports the holding of an international peace conference soon. The European Union stresses the need to fight dissemination of disinformation and illegal content and highlights the legal responsibility of platforms in this context. It is with the understanding that the technical rollover texts under consideration do not reflect or address the developments on the ground since the attacks of the 7th of October that we nevertheless reconfirm last year's voting pattern on the resolutions under Agenda Item 49, as well as previous voting patterns for the resolutions under Agenda Item 50. As regards the resolution on UNRWA operations, the EU believes that UNRWA is pivotal to the delivery of essential services to Palestine refugees in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, as well as Gaza and the West Bank. including East Jerusalem, and is a stabilizing force in the region, being an essential provider of vital services to millions of Palestinian refugees. The EU and its member states are collectively the largest contributors to UNRWA's budget. The European Union remains a staunch and predictable supporter of UNRWA, both politically and financially. We will continue to support UNRWA in the future. However, the EU regrets that there was no opportunity for negotiation on the resolution operation of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East. The resolution under consideration today does not reflect the situation on the ground in Gaza and the challenges that the agency faces. Furthermore, we point out that the term Palestine in any of the resolutions under consideration by the Fourth Committee cannot be construed as a recognition of a state of Palestine, and is without prejudice to the individual positions of the member states on this issue, and hence on the question of the validity of an accession to the conventions and treaties mentioned therein. The European Union as a whole has not expressed a legal qualification with regard to the term forced displacement used in resolutions. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Spain for her statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And allow me to offer some additional comments on the three resolutions under consideration under Agenda Item 50. Dear colleagues, the United States firmly believes that when the current crisis ends, we must not go back to the pre-October 7th status quo in Gaza and in the West Bank, a status quo where Hamas terrorized Israel and used Palestinian civilians as human shields. And we must not go back to the status quo where violent extremist settlers in the West Bank terrorize Palestinians. That status quo was untenable, and it is unacceptable for the future. There also has to be a positive vision of what comes next after this crisis. In our view, that vision must be centered around a negotiated two-state solution that includes both Gaza and the West Bank in a viable Palestinian state. President Biden has been clear that Israelis and Palestinians equally deserve to live safely and securely, and they deserve equal measures of freedom, dignity, justice, and prosperity. The United States is firmly committed to supporting the path to a two-state solution through constructive measures. Getting there will require concerted efforts by all of us, Israelis, Palestinians, regional partners, and world leaders, to put us on this path to peace. We regret that these three resolutions now under consideration do not contribute to this vision. But while they are deeply flawed and do not meet this moment, the United States will continue to work with all parties to chart a future where Israelis and Palestinians have these equal measures of security, freedom, justice, opportunity, and dignity, and a future where Palestinians can fully realize their legitimate right to self-determination and aspirations for a state of their own. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Poland.
Madam Chair, for decades, Poland has been involved in humanitarian and development aid projects in the Middle East, with particular focus on Palestine and Lebanon. Since 2007, Poland invariably supports UNRWA, both on political and financial level, which is a clear proof of our wider political commitment to the stabilization of the Middle East. Poland fully appreciates the work of UNRWA and its stabilizing role in the region of the Middle East. We are convinced that it is an indispensable tool for providing assistance to Palestinian people in terms of protection and basic services that highly contributes to the strengthening stability in the hosting countries. Madam Chair, we decided this year to maintain our voting manner on the resolutions presented under both agenda items 49 and now 50. At the same time, Poland follows with great concern the unfolding current devastating crisis in the Middle East. We know very well the consequences of war, invasion, and terror, which are felt for generations. We strongly believe that the lives of civilians on both sides must be protected in accordance with international law and international humanitarian law. It is our common duty to ensure humanitarian assistance to innocent civilians in Gaza. We call for allowing access for relevant United Nations agencies
and their implementing partners. In this vein, we would also like to appeal to all parties involved to allow third country nationals, including Polish citizens and members of their families, to leave the Gaza Strip safe and sound. It is with no doubt their fundamental humanitarian right to be able to leave a war zone in times of conflict. Madam Chair, would like to emphasize once again that terrorism aiming at the civilian population cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. Suffering of the innocent is never justified. This is why we are convinced that Israel, like in any other country, has the right to defend itself and its citizens in compliance with the international law and international humanitarian law. We are also joining all those calling for immediate and unconditional release of all hostages taken into the Gaza Strip. Madam Chair, Poland supports all international efforts aimed at restoring peace. The international community needs to engage with regional actors to encourage and persuade all sides to step back. It is crucial to prevent regional escalation. Poland stands ready to support any process that would help achieve a diplomatic solution to the ongoing conflict. And I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank Ambassador Jeski for his statement. I now open the floor to delegations wishing to explain their vote on any or all of these three draft resolutions. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom will again maintain its voting positions on these three resolutions in line with our long-standing approach to and support of the two-state solution, which remains the only viable long-term solution. We again welcome the approach of the Permanent Observer State of Palestine and the provision of technical rollovers of these texts, and recognise the language does not again reflect the current context in Israel and Gaza. My delegation would like to recall the same points on this item as it did on item 49. So, as I set out previously, our voting on today's resolution does not undermine our enduring solidarity with Israel in the wake of Hamas's heinous terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. Alongside our ongoing support for Israel's right to self-defense against terrorism, we continue to be clear that Israel must act in line with international humanitarian law and take every feasible precaution to avoid harming civilians. We continue to underline, in parallel to our votes today on these resolutions, that Hamas does not speak or act in the interest of the Palestinian people. Hamas's deliberate murder and kidnapping of innocent civilians in Israel now callously puts civilians in Gaza at risk. We express our pain again at seeing so many innocent civilian lives destroyed on and since the 7th of October, and reiterate our support for the Palestinian Authority as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Palestinian civilians are experiencing a devastating humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Violence remains rising in the West Bank. We strongly condemn settler violence against Palestinians and maintain our long-standing position that settlements are illegal under international law and contrary to the cause of peace. To prevent further spread of the conflict, the UK will continue to invest in all efforts for a political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The UK will work with our partners towards a two-state solution based on the 1967 lines of Jerusalem as the shared capital, which provides justice and security for both Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. Colleagues, the committee will now proceed to take a decision on draft resolution L13 through to L15, one by one. We turn first to L13, entitled Work of the Special Committee to Investigate Israeli Practices Affecting the Human Rights of the Palestinian People and Other Arabs of the Occupied Territories. I now give the floor to the Secretary of the Committee to announce the additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L13.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution A/C4/78/L13 on the committee's e-delegate portal are reflected on the screen. Allow me to read them out. I see Algeria, Bahrain, Belize, Brunei Darussalam, Gambia, Indonesia, Iraq, Jordan, Malaysia, Maldives, and Sudan.
Libya.
This is pardon. Maldives. It doesn't. It's short circuiting on my computer. Let's see again.
Libya.
Oh, sorry. I'll do it over. Algeria, Bahrain, Belize, Brunei Darussalam, Gambia, Indonesia, Iraq, Jordan, Libya, Malaysia, Maldives, Somalia, and Sudan. Other delegations not on the screen wishing to co-sponsor L13 should signify by pressing their microphone button now. I see none. Chair, thank you.
The committee will now proceed to take a decision on draft resolution L13 through to L15. We shall now begin the voting process on this draft. Those in favor of draft resolution L13, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The committee is now voting on draft resolution L13 entitled Work of the Special Committee to Investigate Israeli Practices Affecting the Human Rights of the Palestinian People and Other Arabs of the Occupied Territories. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting has now been completed. Please lock the machine.
The results are as follows. Those in favor, 85, against 13, abstention 72. The draft resolution is adopted. The committee will now take action on draft resolution A/C4/78 L14 entitled The Occupied Syrian Golan. I give the floor to the Secretary of the Committee to announce the additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L14.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L14 on the committee's delegate portal are reflected on the screen. Allow me to read them out. I see Algeria, Bahrain, Belize, Brunei Darussalam, Comoros, Gambia, Indonesia, Iraq, Jordan, Malaysia, Mauritania, South Africa, and Sudan. Other delegations not on the screen and wishing to co-sponsor draft resolution L14 should signify by pressing their microphone button. Where are they? It's not here. I don't have it. Among the additional co-sponsors is also Somalia. I don't have it on my computer, it's short-circuiting here, but Somalia. Other delegations not on the screen and wishing to co-sponsor draft resolution L14 should signify by pressing their microphone button now. I see none, Chair. Thank you.
I thank the Secretary of the committee, and we shall now begin the voting process on this draft resolution. Those in favor of draft resolution L14, please signify. Those against, and abstentions.
The committee is now voting on draft resolution L14 entitled The Occupied Syrian Golan. Will all delegations confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the screen? The voting is now completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 146, against, 2, abstention, 23. Draft resolution L14 is adopted. The committee will now take a decision on draft resolution A/C4/78/L15 entitled Israeli Settlements in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, including East Jerusalem and the Occupied Syrian Golan. First, I give the floor to the Secretary of the committee to announce additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L15.
Thank you, Chair. The additional co-sponsors of draft resolution L15 on the committee's e-delegate portal are reflected on the screen. I'll read them out. I see Algeria, Bangladesh, plurinational state of Bolivia, Cuba, Djibouti, Egypt, Kuwait, Lebanon, Maldives, Mauritania, Morocco, Namibia, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, South Africa, Tunisia, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Yemen, and the Observer State of Palestine. Okay, those were the sponsors. Here now are the additional co-sponsors. Bahrain, Belgium, Belize, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Brazil.
Meaning that if we want to go back to the old style of rebuilding what was destroyed in Gaza, we are facing a long humanitarian, developmental, and economic challenge with security consequences. Let me stop at that and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdallah. Edie Lederer.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I have a couple of questions from both the report and a couple from what you just said. In the release that you sent out, you said that the poverty rate in the state of Palestine will soar by 34% as if it continues for a second month. 34% from what baseline and what kind of numbers are you talking about with that? And maybe you want to answer that and then I'll keep going.
Okay, so when we say 34%, we are comparing that to a business as usual, no war scenario.
Right.
And the absolute numbers is that we will have additional 500,000 people falling under the poverty line.
In addition to how many before?
the average for Palestine, all of it, was about 34% as well. So we are increasing from Gaza was 61%, West Bank was around 30%, and we have an average 34% increase in those two percentages to give us, unfortunately, additional 500,000 people falling into poverty.
Okay, and of the 61% and the combination of Gaza and the West Bank before,
Yes.
what, in terms of numbers, how many people was that? You're adding 500,000 to what number?
We are at, please.
1.8 million.
1.8 million. Great. Okay, that clears up one question that I think we all wanted to know in terms of the numbers and the baseline. And
Can I add something else before?
Put your microphone.
Sorry. Let me add something else. It's not only the money metric poverty. It is the multidimensional poverty that is more important. 96%, it's almost all Gazan population are drifted to multidimensional poor.
Okay, most of the world doesn't know what multidimensional poverty is.
It's the
Can you please
deprivation.
explain
Okay,
it?
it is the deprivation of various services needs that the people need. So you're deprived not only from income, but you're deprived from access to health, you're deprived from access to services, utilities, you're deprived from access to transportation, freedom of movement, you're deprived, these are the multidimensional poverty, which is the deprivation that the person is suffering from. So we shifted now, most of the people in Gaza now, they are multidimensionally poor, which is multidimensionally deprived of various essential services for livelihood. And this is the key, in addition to the deprivation of income that Abdullah and I would just mentioned to you that we drifted, that in total in Palestine. These are only deprived from income, but we're talking about additional deprivation of the result of the war on that, which is massive. And as Abdullah said, even if we have a ceasefire today, okay, and rebuilding starts, that deprivation, yes, will improve, but we will not move more than, we will shift from 96% to around 60%.
Okay, and what was the multidimensional poverty rate before October 7th?
Before October 7th, it was around 45%.
And that was throughout the Palestinian territories or just in Gaza?
No, Palestinian territory.
Okay. And on what was the Palestinian GDP before October 7th?
It was $20.4 billion. 18% of it is in Gaza, and the rest is from the West Bank. So again, that gives you an idea about the proportion of the shock, that a shock of destruction in one small part, of less than 20% of the economy, caused all that damage in the whole of the economy.
And why is that? Is that because of the fallout of what happened on...